Alright, so now we're just going to be doing the state return for the Washington-Windsor problem. Now you will not have access to do this with WorldTax Prep. So you're basically watching this video and taking notes so you kind of can familiarize yourself with how the state return works. It is not hard at all. It's very simple. All the information, not all the information, most of the information is carried forward from the federal return, and you are just filling in a few items on the New York State return to complete the return, and I will walk you through that. And I'm also going to show you how to get the education credit for New York State, because New York State also has an education credit. The requirements are a little bit different. We'll look at that, but it's important to get that one also if a student qualifies for the federal education credit, they may also qualify for New York State. So let's go back to the main info. Now, don't worry about my main info being red. Usually, you've probably been told that everything should be green. That's only because I did not have the ERO firm name here, but don't worry about that. So, in the federal tax part of this video, I said that you put the residence, the taxpayer's state here, and that would generate the form. So if I put New York, it automatically populates these New York State forms, the tax return forms. New York tax return is called the IT 201. Now, if they were, part year, then you could choose that, or if it's a different state, you can do that. So let's move on to the New York State. So basically, to do this return, you just go to the New York State page 1 and you start working your way through. The address is carried forward, Social Security is carried forward, all the information is carried forward that we need. If not a United States resident, you don't have to choose either one of these options right now because they are a United States resident. Now, this is the first question. This is just an informational thing. The county a resident, there are 5 counties in New York City. If they're not living in New York City and they're living outside New York City, you just find the county that they're part of. If you're not sure, use your friend Google. You will have access to research and internet on most computers, so do not hesitate to research. Alright, taxpayer is in Queens because that's what we're using. We're using our own zip code and state for the, so you can just put your own. Wherever you live, put your county of residence, school district name, also Queens. Now the school district number, this information you're not going to know. I don't know what the Queens school district number is, so all I'll do is I'll look it up. So we have New York State school district codes, and this should bring you to the New York State tax website, and you just find the county, and then find your county. Well, since you're not going to be doing the practice, I'm sorry, you're not going to be doing the practice. You're going to be, the only time you're going to see the actual New York State is when you're doing an actual return. So find the taxpayer's county in here. So let's say a taxpayer is from Queens, and just click on it, and it's 519. See, it also gives you the school district name. I remember that one. So once you get the county, you can get the school district name and the school district code by looking, this page up. What's the link? This is the link, but you don't have to memorize. Just use Google. And so that's the first thing you fill out. You move on, and then it asks informational questions. Most of these questions you're just going to ask the taxpayer. So all I would say is, did you have a financial account located outside of the United States in a foreign country? And then depending on the answer, you check one. So we're going to say no for now. What happens if you say yes? There might be additional forms that come up. I do not remember at this point, but again, if something else comes up, it's not going to be the end of the world. Do not panic. I know when I started it in the beginning, it was very scary because I had never done a New York State return, but most of it is just informational things, and if you don't have the information, you ask the client or you look it up online. So let's go with no. Then we come down to if they're Yonkers resident and part year resident only, we're going to say no because we live in Queens, which is part of New York City. And New York City residents and part year residents only. Alright, let's see. So now we're going to have to fill these parts out. Because New York State had a New York State income tax return, the taxpayer will be subject to that. New York City also has a income tax, so this is important to get right. Not all cities have an income tax. New York City is one of the cities that does have an income tax. So, number of months you lived in New York City. Alright. We'll say 12. Number of months your spouse. In this case, taxpayer has no spouse. He says you must complete this line for line 69 on page 4 to calculate correctly, and press F3 if 0. If the taxpayer lived neither in New York City nor in Yonkers, you would have 0 here, 0 there, and you would just move on. And you could just read through and see if any of these questions apply. I know they don't apply, so I'm just going to move on. Page number 2. There's nothing to fill out here. If there was 529, you would add that here. Don't worry about that right now. That's an advance thing you may not be familiar with. Okay, so it looks like nothing on this page needs to be changed. We go to page 3 now. For the most part, you're not going to be touching any of these numbers pertaining to the income, the credits, the deductions, unless there's a specific credit that you know that they should be getting and it's not applying. So, New York City resident tax. Check here if a full year resident. So someone who lives in New York City, they have to check this box and then it will automatically fill in these fields. This has to do with the New York City income tax. Line 59, the sales or use tax. I'll quickly explain what that is. You can ask the site coordinator or manager to see if you're going to be asking every taxpayer this or not. I am not sure if this is something that will be asked, but basically sales or use tax is when you, as a New York State resident, buy something online or out of state and you do not pay any sales tax for New York State on it. You have to report that here. The other thing is the use tax, which is, let's say you bought something in New Jersey, the sales tax there is only 1%. So what you would have to do is you would have to pay the difference between the 1% and the New York State sales tax, which is, let's say, 8%. So 8 minus 1 is a 7%. So you would have to pay 7% on that purchase here, and you would have to fill this out. I have never seen anyone declare that they have sales or use tax, so this is almost always 0. But just for your information, you know what that is. So we leave that as 0. We move on, and everything that we need here is filled out. Let's go to page 4. Okay, again, most of the stuff we're going to leave as it is because the numbers, they are pulled directly from the federal tax return and you do not want to change them unless there's something specific that we know the taxpayer should be getting. Alright. Now let's answer some of these questions. Do you want to electronically file this return? Depending on what the taxpayer wants, most of the time it's a yes. What are you e-filing? And it's going to be the income tax return. I do not recall doing an extension ever for a taxpayer, but maybe if someone just wants to file an extension for New York State rather than filing a return, then you would choose this. But because we're filing the return, we choose that. Then some more informational questions about their direct deposit and bank account. Now check here if you have a federal refund that you want the state refund to go to. If it's the same account, you click here. Or if if they want a different option, if you want it in a different account, you click here. So you can just read these options. It's pretty self-explanatory. Go through that. Type of account, personal or business, checking or saving. You put that here, but because we're using the same account as the federal, we don't have to enter this information in again. But if it was a different account, let's say we click this, then you would need one of these options. So that should make sense. Okay, and then it asks again if the bank account is located outside the United States. We'll say no. And it looks like our New York State return is done. However, we are aware that the taxpayer got a credit for education, and I told you that New York State also has one, and you see these red forms. That means something else needs to be filled out. So let's take a look at the 272, which is the New York College tuition credit or itemized deduction. Now, how we can get more information on this, you don't have to memorize it. It's very similar to the American Opportunity Tax Credit. However, New York 272 qualifications. Alright, I'm just, in front of you, I'm doing the research. I click on this, and now let's take a look at who's entitled to this credit or deduction. If you're a full year New York State resident, so they have to be a New York State resident. You or your spouse, dependent, or an undergraduate student who was enrolled or attended institution of higher education, paid qualified expenses, and are not claimed as dependent. So this again is similar to the federal requirements. So it has to be an undergrad. So if someone is using it for their graduate program, they can get it. Now the qualified expenses, just to summarize again, this is basically only applicable to their tuition, not to the books. You see, qualified tuition expenses do not include tuition paid through scholarship or financial aid, which is again the same as the federal. However, on top of that, amounts for room and board and other similar living expenses. Okay, this is also the same as federal. This is the only difference. Amounts paid for books, equipment, and activities, even if required by the school, are not includable as a qualified tuition expense. So keep that in mind. So what that means for our taxpayer now is that we cannot include their books, which they don't have anyways. Problem says they only have $5,000 in tuition. We're going to use that. So if a taxpayer comes to you and they paid for books, it's okay for American Opportunity Tax Credit and possibly lifetime learning for the federal return, but not for New York State. So let's start and read the question. Does the taxpayer also qualify? You have to actively come to this return and you have to check yes. Alright, if you mess up here, that's it. The taxpayer is going to lose out on this. So make sure you check yes. You come down, is the taxpayer claimed on someone else's return? So no. This field should automatically be calculated, and we'll take a look at why it's not. Where your expenses for undergraduate tuition? Yes. So we just looked at it has to be for undergraduate. If you check no here, then they wouldn't qualify. So you can basically go through the return and kind of answer the questions, and if they don't qualify, then they wouldn't get it. But if you know they should qualify based on all the answers being yes, and they don't, you need to look at your answers and make sure you did it right. Now, remember I mentioned when we were doing the federal that the EIN number carries over. Okay, the mistake I made is I put it here instead of here, which is where the school's information is. So that was a mistake on my part. So in the federal, it doesn't matter, but for the New York State, it does matter. You do need the EIN number. So it's good to understand the relationship between these two forms. So there we go. Now it's automatically there, and it looks like New York State has applied, and we're good on that. Alright, so I'm going to be ending the video at this point. We'll quickly look at the next video, just a couple more things, the 208, and then we'll wrap up New York State.